Good morning, and thank you for joining me today. My name is Donovan Forrest, and I'm excited to present on the techno-structural interventions in gifted education using multi-tiered systems of support and group dynamics. As an EDD candidate and a gifted coordinator at the School District of Philadelphia, and someone who has been, both in special education and gifted programming, this topic is both professional and personal to me. And so today we're going to define organizational development and explore its role in education. I'll walk you through how techno-structural interventions support multi-tier systems of support and highlight their application in improving gifted education equity. Lastly, I'll share practices that can be applied in real educational settings, particularly in our schools, particularly in the era where section chapter 16 is really a requirement of all of our schools in the district and in the state. I think that this work and the system that we're going to introduce will ensure that students are receiving the services that they need to thrive, and ultimately we meet district and statewide goals. And so, as I mentioned prior, this work matters to me because I was once a twice exceptional learner. I was identified as both gifted and needing special education supports, including resource room and 504 plans. And so I know how brilliance can be overlooked when it doesn't fit the mold. This work is about equity. It's about belonging. It's about unlocking potential in overlooked students, like the young man in these photos. And so, what is organizational development? So, organizational development, or OD, is planned systemic approach to improving effectiveness within organizations. So, it leverages data and behavioral science to align structure, support change, and build capacity. In education, particularly in our schools, OD can help reform service delivery and improve student outcomes. We think about techno-structural interventions. So those focus on redesigning structures and workflows. In schools, this means aligning job roles, data systems, qualitative and quantitative, and policies to support equitable gifted access. These changes aim to improve student outcomes and promote system-wide learning. Within multi-tiered systems of support, so some key tools include universal screeners like COGAT, robust data systems like Illuminate or an Infinite Campus, and tiered workflows such as RTI referral paths. These tools help identify giftedness early and also across diverse populations. Many of our schools currently use Illuminate, and so looking at the grades, looking at the data from our students will ensure that we can identify traits that may lead them to receiving gifted services. And so when we think about gifted, there's definitely that difference between gifted students and high performing students, right? We know that gifted students are students who ask a lot of questions, problem solvers, autonomous in their work, creative. And so when we look at, the difference between high performing and gifted students don't always have to have straight A's, right? So we think about when we look at the themes in their work, right? That can help us identify them early. And the criteria is really, it's quite vast. And so that will ensure that more students are, being considered for gifted services and not just general education. And so when we think about data, centralized dashboards allow for educators and the school administrators to visualize those trends, support early identification, and ensure transparency. By consolidating these data sources, they help the teams on both at the school level and the district level align on interventions and that reduce subjective bias and referrals. We know so many of our students, whether they're from historically marginalized communities, Title I schools, aren't always considered for gifted services as students in other well-funded neighborhoods or schools. And so it's important that we definitely check out and we consider bringing OD into the multi-tiered systems of supports. And so when we do that, those three phases are aligning staff roles and team supports, We've redesigned your job processes to foster innovation, right? So we ensure that we are, having a robust team within our schools, but we kind of shift the narrative on what your job looks like so that you can ensure that there's more innovation and also autonomy and ensuring that students are receiving the gifted services that they need to thrive. And so we refine systems for both sustainability and long-term improvement and impact. When we think about group dynamics and the fundamentals, so OD, it leverages those group dynamics, right? The strengths, some of the challenges, how you perform together. We think about that as how teams form, storm, norm, and perform. That's a, decade long idea, but strong collaboration is essential for MTS implementation as anything else, right? So we need to know how we work well together. We need to be on the same page, and that prevents resistance and communication breakdowns. One of our priorities in introducing, the requirements in the MTSS is ensuring that we know the expectations of Chapter 16. We all have the document, but sometimes, it's it takes initiative to understand it. And so, we really want to make sure that all of our school leaders and gifted services teams know what's required, and ultimately, before we introduce our multi-tier systems of support. When we think about training and interventions, so we think about a few things, right? That emotional intelligence aspect. So training boosts emotional intelligence and shared language, right? So we're all on the same page. We understand each other better, so we ultimately can find common ground to, work together. And we also need to reflect on our biases, right? I have bias. You have bias. Everyone has bias, right? Bias isn't a bad thing. It's just a natural, state of being human. But we need to reflect on that. How does that impact our work? How can we use that to be transparent ultimately in building trust and co-creating solutions? So these interventions reduce that resistance, right, to change, promote belonging, and anchor change in relationships. And so when you think about application in the School District of Philadelphia's gifted programs, in the school district, platforms and screeners can expand access to underrepresented gifted students, right? We're rolling out new technology that probably hasn't even been introduced yet. But those tiered workflows support consistent processes, and training ensures all staff understand giftedness beyond test scores. Like I mentioned earlier, giftedness isn't all about who did well on the test. Sometimes it's about how do students think about, what they engage with in the test, and how creative are they, how autonomous are they, what are they interested in, and oftentimes outside of typical tests and exams. So when we think about implementation phases, we have three phases, right? The first phase includes that planning and training, which could exist anywhere from the end of the first school year to the very beginning of the second. Phase two pilots the MTSS model in targeted schools. So we're going to start off with a small pilot, and we're going to incorporate that feedback and in our evaluation. And then phase three involves evaluating outcomes and scaling successful practices across the district. We plan to do this relatively quickly. It's not just a thing where, we're doing this over a year's time. We have about 3 years to really implement this successfully. And so we are going to run the pilot probably for the first, half of the first year, ensure that we get all the necessarily qualitative, quantitative data, and so that we can move forward to recognizing these challenges and having mitigation in place. And so some of the common challenges that we foresee is the resistance to change, right? Some people, some schools, some educators may say, hey, we don't have a problem with our gifted program, right? So when we think about the resistance to change, some people may feel, all the numbers, the data, right? We know that these type of programs are very data heavy. So we want to make sure that we are addressing these through strong design that are backed by research-based practices, staff input, family input, and transparent communication throughout the process. And so training on dashboards also builds capacity and reduces the friction. We know that we are all busy professionals. We want to be able to give this to you on an autonomous basis, right? To ensure that, you can make it your own. You can do it at a time that is flexible to you, but also that we are reaching those goals and receiving those data points. And so my strategic fit, my role at the School District of Philadelphia is the gifted coordinator. I will lead the multi-tier systems of support redesign. And this includes the piloting in schools, training staff, and aligning Chapter 16 requirements. My role will to ensure the system fidelity, efficiency, and ultimately scale the model district-wide. And with that being said, that is my presentation. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. You have my email. This was an absolute pleasure talking to you about, what we plan to do within the months ahead. And so, just a little bit, these are some of the sources that inform the framework, right, as we begin to think about the multi-tiered systems of support. And they include that foundational or organizational development text and contemporary scholarship on gifted equity and MTSS implementation. Thank you.